This morning, we're checking in again on the civil war raging in Syria. The country's former prime minister, who defected last week, says the government of dictator Bashar Al-Assad is near collapse, but the daily street battles show no sign of slowing down. This amateur video was reportedly shot in the war-torn city of Aleppo, one of the bloodiest battle zones between rebels and government troops. Activists say more than 20,000 people have been killed in Syria since the uprising against Assad started 17 months ago. The UN estimates that 2.5 million people have been injured, driven from their homes, or somehow affected by the fighting. Joining us is CBS News foreign affairs analyst Pamela Falk. Pam, good morning to you.
Good morning, Terrell.
A major defection from the former prime minister, who is now talking, by the way. What is he saying?
He said that most of the country is now diminished. The military is diminished, and this is the highest level defector yet. And according to him, the government only controls 30% of the territory, and that's very significant.
Also encouraging more government officials to take the side of the people. Do you think that we'll see more top-level defections coming?
Absolutely, and that was another thing he predicted. He predicted that, and he also said, as a message, that the actions of Assad were against God, which is really a message to the clerics in the country. But yes, he's calling for more defections, and he's saying now is the time to leave. I mean, the point is, when he also said that many people are ready to leave the government and the military.
What's the status of the Assad regime right now? Do we really know?
Well, they're fighting to the death. I mean, they seem to be holding on. They're using more attack helicopters. They're really shelling intensely the city of Aleppo. But that's where I think you're starting to see the ground shift a little bit. And that's where the defections come in. That's where the rebels starting to take some of the military command units and also territory makes a difference.
Is it fair to say at this point that Assad's days are numbered? Is it just a matter of when the regime falls?
Yes, absolutely. And that's the position that the United States has taken, that there's no way back for Assad, that his days are numbered. The question is how many people have to die to get there, and that's the sad part of the issue. There are 20,000 people dead, according to the opposition.
And the UN is talking to top-level Syrian officials trying to get aid, at least to civilians and people there that need it. But with the fighting like this...
Valerie Amos, the humanitarian chief, is in the country.
Right. Is this going to happen?
Well, probably not, and that's why there is some talk of a no-fly zone, although Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta said it's not on a front burner, but they need help to protect humanitarian aid workers. That is what happened with the UN-authorized observers. They can't go in between people fighting, and now you do have a much more complicated situation because you have Al-Qaeda fighting in Syria, and that makes it much more complicated, and it's very hard to protect humanitarian workers. They have not been able to get the aid, and their refugees are flowing into other countries, and that is really the biggest danger of that is a spillover effect into Lebanon, into Turkey, Iraq, Jordan, and of course Israel's right on the border as well.
You mentioned a no-fly zone, and that's interesting because that's exactly what we saw in Libya when NATO stepped in to help the rebels there. And you also mentioned Defense Secretary Leon Panetta, and what he said in an interview, creating a no-fly zone around Syria is, quote, not a front burner issue. What's the difference between the situation that we saw in Libya and what we're seeing right now in Syria?
Well, the difference in Libya, first and foremost, was that the United Nations agreed to it because there was no blocking by Russia and China. And so that's the biggest difference. There's also the difference that Al-Qaeda is in Syria, making it much more difficult, and the military of Assad is much stronger. That said, there was an ambassador of Libya who defected, and therefore he was able to say, recognize the opposition from the United Nations. That's a big difference. But ultimately, I actually believe it's more because of domestic constraints that the United States does not want to go in, even with Turkey or NATO, until there's more rebel territory that's taken that's discrete. Because if it's not, you have the danger of killing rebels or civilians.
Let's talk about Kofi Annan as we move toward a solution here, leaving his position at the end of the month, the big author of that peace plan, albeit a failure. What happens to him? Who is his replacement?
Well, the idea of the peace plan, or keeping it in place, is that if there is a transition, there's some kind of a transition plan, and that would make a transition government. The most likely successor, at least that's what's being talked about, is a man called Lakhdar Brahimi, and he's an Algerian diplomat, a lot of experience in transitions in South Africa and other countries, in Afghanistan, when there was so much conflict, but then a government came in.
Anything stopping him from having to deal with the same situation, though?
No, I don't know why anyone would want this job, and it's probably why there's been a delay in naming him. It would bring him out of retirement, and it's a very hard task to take when it's likely to fail for many years because there's also sectarian conflict that we're starting to see in the country. By the way, most of the defectors that you're talking about have been Sunnis, and the government is this small minority Alawite Shia. Right. And so that's the other thing. But having this
talking about Iran and Hezbollah and Lebanese Shiites, it becomes a proxy war.
And Iran has increased the aid to Syria, and that is threatening Israel as well as the nuclear ambitions. So you've got a lot of a lot of hot burner issues on the agenda.
CBS News foreign affairs analyst Pamela Falk joining us this morning. Thank you so much, Pam. Appreciate it.
Good to be here, Terrell.